Today's webinar is the latest thinking on contact center metrics. I'm Rachel and I'm going to be your webinar chairperson for today. To reintroduce our two brilliant speakers, they've been both on a lot of our webinars, but as always, going to introduce them again. To Maurice Pentle from the Customer Experience Foundation. Welcome, Maurice.
Good afternoon and bonjour, and I've forgotten the other languages that were required today. Hola.
There we go. And for people who don't know who you are, a bit of an introduction, please.
Certainly, I am the chairman of the Customer Experience Foundation. I started out back in the day with Mike talking about contact centers more years ago than either of us would care to remember. And the Customer Experience Foundation is a global organization of experts in a range of fields that relate to experience.
Brilliant. Delighted to have you on board, and also to Mike Murphy from Genesys. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Rachel, and Maurice, thank you. And hi, everybody. Good to be here. Looking forward to this webinar. I like this subject, and yeah, it should be an interesting webinar.
Fab. And for people who don't know who Genesys is, could you give them well, I'm sure they don't need an introduction, but let's go for it anyway.
Well, so it's a brand that has been for 30 years really in the contact center software marketplace. Maybe years ago there were systems, but today it's very much software. So to that extent, we do focus pretty much exclusively on the customer experience part. So to that end, if you will, we've got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and we've got some exciting things happening in our R&D lab. So you know, we're kind of recognized in the industry, which is cool. But you know, we always strive to do better.
Brilliant. Delighted to have you both on board. Just to go through a bit of housekeeping, we are taking a recording of today's webinar, which will be available later on this afternoon, usually about an hour after the webinar, on callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars. Just a reminder, there's a lot of you already signed into the chat room, but the discussion is all going on there. It's callcenterhelper.com/chat. Perfect reason to log in is that you can download a copy of both the speaker's slides. It's available on this link here, and you can download the chat log after the webinar on this link. So we are doing our usual champagne or chocolates for the best tip. You just need to use #question to ask a question of the panel, or #tip for a tip. And we can, of course, we do ship the champagne or chocolates worldwide, so it doesn't matter where you are, we will find a prize to be able to send to you. So we've been asking in the chat room, how is everyone feeling today? I think I'm going to hand over the baton to you, Maurice, to explain why we've been asking this question. Right, there we go.
Certainly. Let me put my screen up, and let me just get rid of this and do this, and hopefully everyone will be able to see my slides.
I can, yes.
Good. The reason we've been asking how people feel is because what I'm going to talk about today is the old science of emotion and how it affects the way that we understand and operate in business, and especially in the contact center environment. And before I explain why we asked the question, and thank you, Rachel, for setting this up so beautifully, what I just want to point out to the audience is one of the things that irritates me about some of the things I read about customer experience and about emotion. We know with a degree of certainty that unhappy customers and unhappy staff equal unhappy shareholders. We also know that unhappy staff and equals unhappy customers, and that equals unhappy shareholders. We therefore know that happy customers and happy staff equal happy shareholders. Now, my point is this, that what I'm about to talk about is science. It's not invention. Nothing we're about to say is purely out of our theoretical work. This is all about stuff that can be proven by the only thing we rely on, which is real observation. And one of the real observations of life is that there are very few things, with the exception of a dress size, that are a perfect 10. And in my work, I frequently ask people, tell me 5 things in your life that are a perfect 10. And I've never found anybody who can come up with a list of 5 things. And that's a bit of a problem, because when we talk to our customers, we ask people to rate them between 1 and 10 or 0 and 10. We think in a slightly different way. We think about things in terms of being okay, and this is why we ask the question at the beginning as to how people feel. When I think about how I feel today, I may feel slightly better than I did yesterday, slightly worse than I did yesterday, but I think in terms of okay as being the center of my understanding. And from a practical point of view, understanding this one specific area of how we organize and communicate information actually created the opportunity for us to understand how the way people discuss and talk about experience within their social communities. Now, you may have noticed that my screen has appeared to have frozen.
Ah.
And so, Rachel, can we now go to plan number 2?
Yes, I will pass over. I'm going to make Charlie the presenter. So hopefully if you could put up...
Sorry about this, ladies and gentlemen, but I am no longer seeing the...
It's fine. We can go to the chat room and see what people are saying. I mean, there's a lot of people saying hello. So, you know, saying good morning and everything. We've got people, Kayla from Sheffield. We've got Denise calling in from Cape Cod in Massachusetts. So Jonty's asked in the chat room, what scoring system do you use for your customer metrics? A scale of 0 to 10, 1 to 5, and Kathy said 1 to 5. So, yes. Right, let's...
If I may, so my screen is now working again. I don't know what that was. We could go to me.
Let's
Our model is based on -5 to +5, and the reason that it's based around that is because OK does sit in the middle, and from a practical point of view, if we try and understand the way we talk about things socially, if we talk about the way things work socially, then something is either something I don't care about, it's either something I care about but I'm not going to do anything about, something is very, or it's very, very, or it's more than. And though the words may vary, so instead of very, very, it might be completely, or, you know, the syntax may change, but basically our method of understanding all emotional outputs as people socially is based around either more I care but it doesn't interest me enough to do something, or I don't care, or it's okay. So the science suggests that a -5 to a +5 system is in fact the most is the most practical way of actually understanding customer emotions efficiently. And as with all forms of efficiency, the more efficient your metric is, the closer to reality your conversation is. But before I get to that, I'd just like to briefly talk about what's going on in terms of the contact center industry. And here's a slide that very kindly was lent to me by Everest Consulting. And what it suggests is that the future of agency, the future of our FTE is going to be moving up the emotional fulfillment chain over the next few years. Now, I don't know how many low-end agents who are going to be simply post-boxing information will disappear over the next 3 years or 5 years. These guys are suggesting it may be down to 45%, but there's no doubt that we are becoming more engaged with self-service, we're becoming more engaged with the use of omni-channel tools that take things forward. And as a result of that, what we're seeing is a reduction in the number of agents in the contact center. And from a practical point of view, what those agents are going to be doing is to be providing the link when things go wrong. So I think that everyone will agree that in their own experience, they're seeing more and more self-service, more and more things done in the app. But when things go wrong, then really what we want is an agent to help us across that rickety bridge. And from my point of view, I just love that picture, but I think it's a great analogy of what I think the role of the contact center agent is going to be in the future, because understanding how to help the customer across that bridge is going to be crucial. So what do I think the business challenge is? Well, I think the business challenge is actually talking about emotions in the boardroom. I think we're more likely to talk about the latest salacious gossip about who's having a relationship with who than we are to talk about our customer emotions. And you can see from the two pictures that we've got on the screen that these two pictures represent situations in which perhaps trying to sell something to a customer is not exactly an ideal thought at this moment in time. And if you look at the young man with his hands over the ears, this is not the time to deliver a lecture. It's not the time to do anything. And most parents will recognize at that moment what you ought to do is to back off and get the young man to calm down so you can actually have a conversation. But in business, we don't think like that. We plow on. Now, obviously, in the second set of pictures that you can see on your screen, this might be a good time to offer them an upgrade, to talk to them about some new service or something that they want. And this is not rocket science. This is you understanding emotion in the way that you do as you walk about in your lives. We all do understand emotion as we walk in social situations. We can see who's very upset, we can see who's happy, we can see who's slightly depressed, and yet we lose sight of that when we get into the office and we start to talk in terms of the 6 rules of customer experience, etc., and those kind of things. So how did we get to a situation where we understood this? We started out by looking at the traditional metrics, things like Net Promoter Score and CSAT, and we compared it with the voice of the customer data we were getting alongside these things. And what we found was that the voice of customer information that was being supplied simply didn't measure against the scores that were being provided to a lesser or greater extent. So as an example, Trustpilot, a lot of people in Trustpilot said that they wished that they could give 0 stars. For those of you who are familiar with Happy or Not, that's those wonderful things that you just tap when you go through an airport or through an experience. And there's a certain feeling involved in that that's very satisfying as you express yourself, but there is no voice of the customer opportunity. We found that Net Promoter Score was the least accurate, and one of the reasons for that is there actually isn't a real opposite to recommend not recommending is not the opposite of recommending. It's only a partial. It's only a partial one. The best two were customer satisfaction and customer effort score. And the reason that those two were the best and customer effort was the best of all of them was because we think about effort all the time. How much effort was it to join us today on this webinar? How much effort is it to complete that report you've got to do? We probably think about effort somewhere between 10 to 20 times a day at least. Sadly, we think about satisfaction less than that, and I think that's probably a problem that we've got. But we think about recommend almost seldom during the day, except for when we're completing surveys for things that we buy. And we discovered that one of the reasons why there was a problem was because that what we had going on was that there wasn't the opportunity for the answer to become more than. And once again, my machine has actually frozen. I think what we're going to do is pass over to Charlie and stick with Charlie, if that's okay. My apologies, everybody. I have, it's just arrived, but I have closed absolutely every single window, but
perfect.
It hasn't, it hasn't helped. So if we can get that up as the main screen, what we found was that when we put more than up on and added that to the metric, we found that the voice of the customer data made some significant improvements. And then when we added what we call OK-centered maths, or if you like, our E-score scoring system, that -5 to +5 model, what we found was that the metrics were improved again. So if we could move on to the next slide. So just to go back to that, the other thing that we found was that we could simply understand voice of the customer data simply by using this as a structure to understand the information that people were giving, rather than asking them to explain themselves mathematically in some kind of post-survey. So if we can move on to the next slide. We also found that it was possible to do this because words made sense, and we were able to provide a framework in which words make sense. And if Charlie, you could move us on to the next slide, I will just make a point for our international visitors. We have actually established that the same thing does work in a number of languages. We're by no means complete in this work. There are still at least 150 languages we haven't tried this in. But in terms of some of the European ones and Chinese and various others, we've established that the same way of speaking is there in syntax in all of these languages. So if we could move on. So I'm now going to talk, unusually for me, about a case study that I did. Normally my work is covered by so many NDAs that I'm scared that I might talk in my sleep and get sued. But in this case, I'm really pleased to talk about a piece of work that we did for Waitrose, courtesy of friends at Sitel. And this case study is about using conversation-based analysis and using AI in order to understand what was going on. So if we can move on.
Next slide, please.
And this is kind of an example of what happens at the beginning of a conversation. So typically what you've got is someone listening to an IVR that's probably repeating itself, which is not a good thing because we like journeys, not loops. with long music that doesn't really have a beginning and an end. And meanwhile, what's going on for the customer on one side is they may be asking themselves a series of questions about whether or not they can trust you, whether or not you're wasting their time, and a whole series of other things. And from the poor agent's point of view, they may be sitting there thinking it's terrible as well. And just to be clear, everybody, none of this that you're looking at is the actual insight from the Waitrose account. I think that they would shut me down if I actually used the real info. So this is just a kind of demonstration. And from a practical point of view, you need to think about what your customer's thinking about and what your agent's thinking about at the beginning of a conversation if you want to understand how it works. Next slide, please, Charlie. So then what we do is we start to break the conversation down into micro moments. So the best analogy I can give you is this is like slow motion, high definition photography. We're looking at hesitations. We're looking at where people talk over each other. We're looking at things like emotional baggage. And emotional baggage, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is where the customer tells you something that's important to them, and you either acknowledge it or you don't. If you don't acknowledge it, like someone says to you, for instance, I phoned you 3 times about this, and you simply move on to the next thing, then what's going to happen is they're going to say that again later in the conversation. So the sooner you pick up the baggage, the sooner you recognize the customer's problem, the more quickly you're going to put yourself on an even footing with the customer, and the shorter the call will be. Emotional efficiency equals lower cost. So Charlie, if I can ask you as my lovely assistant today to move us on. And then what we do is we then feed all of the insight that we're getting. And so in this particular case, although this is a fake up, what we did was we fed the voice files into AI that started to show us patterns. And those patterns included things like the words that customers use to describe things and the words that we as an organization use to describe things don't always coincide. So when you've got words that customers understand, then they will not ask you to explain them. And again, that's emotional efficiency. That's just going to reduce the length of the call. I frequently hear people in contact centers, not in the Waitrose case, but in lots of cases, where the number one thing that agents are doing is repeating the same answer, even though customers appear not to have understood them. And then, Charlie, if we move on to the next thing. So how do we build an understanding of what's going on? Well, we use a value system, and I'm just going to briefly explain the value system. So the number one set of values are the core values. This is do not sell my data to Cambridge Analytica. Don't put dogs in overhead lockers on airplanes and kill them. Do not beat up elderly doctors, and pay your taxes in Europe. And there are a number of core values where it doesn't matter how much I like you for the other pieces, I will ultimately say I'm not going to do business with you anymore. And when you screw with the core values of people, the ones that make them feel like you are important and part of my community, that's when the price gets expensive. That's when the $80 million fines and those things come in. If we could add the next piece of our value matrix, please. So the first piece of the value matrix is what we call the functional value. That's very simple. A torch lights, a knife cuts, a conversation may give me some insight or may not. Its functional value is relatively simple to understand. The next one is the exchange value. And the exchange value, again, very simple. One carving knife may be worth 2 fish knives. One Citroen C2, my current car, may be worth 1/20th of a Maserati, and you get the idea. A conversation may be a good exchange in which we both get value, and these values apply to everything and there are a number of them in any situation. So just in terms of functional value, it may be important that your retail outlet is close to where I am today, or it may not be important, but that depends on your proposition. So,
A question earlier, which is, when an angry customer calls, do you calm them down before talking them through a problem? And actually, Hannah had a great answer, which is we let them vent, so to speak. We listen to them and then we advise them accordingly, giving them assurances. And she said, customers tend to listen to you if you give them the time at the start of the call, putting yourself in their position. And Joanne said, I'd always deal with emotions before moving on personally and professionally. Maurice, do we have any thoughts on that? Are you there? No, we're kind of half there. Right, so,
My view, Rachel, is I like that approach. I think it's respectful to the customer. I think we're often, if you will, maybe through technology or maybe through procedure, invited to kind of bring structure to the dialogue, if you will, and I have to do my ID and V, and then I must do this and I must do that. And actually, that's really maybe not necessarily appropriate when a customer is in a state of high emotion.
Brilliant. I think it's probably time to go over to the chat room again and see what's happening. So I will take back control and show my screen because we've had a few questions in. So let's see. Ben's asked, which rating system would you advise is the most effective from a customer's point of view? Mike, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So yeah, I mean, for capturing emotion, if you will, I like the one that Maurice has. That very simple sort of, it's visual. It could be like a temperature gauge on the side of the agent's screen. It could be always there, and as they're going through the conversation, they could just click on it as they observe the call and give, if you like, their interpretation of where they think the customer's emotion is. And believe it or not, I was doing a project in 1995, Rachel, where we had a customer screen, and in that screen there were 6 smiley faces, and of course the number 6 wasn't smiley, and everything in between. But I'm thinking back to, like, that's a long time ago, and we're still kind of trying to get those sort of tools more everyday and available in our sort of in our work rate. So I like that simple one from Maurice. I think it's just the kind of thing that makes it easy to capture.
Brilliant. So we've had an opinion in from Paul, who said, I think sometimes the challenge is the fact that as consumers, we're all consistently asked by companies to rate the customer experience. And so as operations, how do we position the feedback that continues to engage the customer? We utilise a transfer mechanism to a survey that asks just one question on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the best. How would the customer rate their experience with the customer service agent that they spoke to that day? More CSAT than NPS, but creates a great engagement tool within the centre to recognise great service delivery. So we've had a question from Hannah, who's asked, why is it that customers feel more assured when they're speaking to a manager rather than a senior member of staff? How do we tackle this? Any keywords we could use to minimise manager callbacks, especially when managers are only going to say the same thing as the previous operator? Mike, I don't know if you had any thoughts on this one. I know that it's something that a lot of people have asked.
Yes, I agree, and I think it's like if I'm already down, if you like, with the brand, and I'm engaging with the brand because I have to fix something, and I'm already impatient, then my threshold for impatience is maybe that's wrong. But anyway, I'm prone, if you like, to want to escalate with some urgency, and if you like, overspeak the agent, if you will. So I think in that sense, trying to figure out what is the background to why the customer is calling. It may well be, if you like, is there something that we can do there to sort of try and eliminate these cases? And I know that's a very easy thing to say and difficult to do, but often, we see situations where there's a lot of, skill being brought in to handle something which really ought to be rooted out and eliminated. So from that perspective, that's kind of my first take. My second take really then is just more on the training side to just equip your staff with confidence, really, and try and just sort of marshal it in a sort of a behavioral, structural, conversational way. And that's just kind of based on my perspective. I think Maurice may have a different view, but
we may
are
never
you there,
know.
Maurice?
No, I think we've still lost him. We're still struggling, Maurice. So I think we're going to hand over to Mike to.
I'm back, if you can hear me.
Oh, there we go. Right, I think we probably hand over to Mike to do his presentation, just to see, to get through that bit.
Yes. It might be worth dialing in on the telephone number provided, if that helps.
I can't get through on the telephone number either.
Oh dear.
Okay, so will I crack on, Rachel?
Yes.
All right, so thanks everybody, and really for me, if like I said in my introduction, my steer is very much around the technology behind the latest thinking in contact center matrix, and I do believe that we're actually at a very change point, and to that end, there's a major shift, I would say, going on with the availability, the way that we consume metrics, the way that we get metrics, and the way that we sort of combine metrics. So the four themes I want to cover really are this notion of it being easy, maybe easier, but easy for me is always a preferred one. Also off the shelf, I think, is starting to become relevant, and I want to share some new players, if you like, that we are seeing in the marketplace ourselves, which are very effective, very cost effective. The notion then of like ready integrated, because I think that's, again, because of modern technology, that's becoming easier and therefore simpler to combine metrics with other technologies. And then the last one, which I must admit, I'm finding to be the most popular request with regards to, okay, Mike, so you've got a great piece of contact center technology. Tell me about your metrics and how can I get your metrics into my domain, my way, so I can do my own thing with those. And that I absolutely find is the most often requested circumstance, shall we say, in how customers want to consume contact center metrics. So if we kind of jump into these, just to kind of plow in and get a bit more detail, the reason I sort of say easy is because in modern day sort of contact center technology, especially those that are cloud-based, I think we've learned a lot over the years, and we've sort of coded the newer platforms to be very, very easy to consume, very easy to work with, and we've learned a lot over time to help make things easier. So this simple graphic here is what we would describe, if you will, as a visual display of the interaction. And what's interesting is, and I'll just sort of move my cursor here, so hopefully that you can sort of see that. But in this sort of visual for an interaction, this happens to be a phone call. The same visual will be available for calls, chats, emails, social, SMS, any type of interaction really, whether it's inbound or outbound. But the notion really is that it kind of makes it more real for me because it is that sort of visual indication. And I have my view of Linda, the agent who's actually dealing with this, and I can see what kind of device she's working on. I can see the external participant. I don't have a name for that participant, but I know they've come from Perth in Australia, and I've got a sort of a CLI there, which is just, by the way, it's a call generator CLI, so don't panic, it's not real. I've got a visual here of the sort of the duration of the call in this case, and I have a vehicle here to help me annotate the recordings of that call, because that's right here. So, if I wish to go into the audio and listen and maybe make some annotations for the agent side or the customer side, I'm able to do that separately and easily. And I suppose the real cute part, I suppose, is this visual below. So in having lots and lots of details, because event-based metrics sort of gather things as they happen and remember them so we can report on them, the timeline is just a nice way to illustrate what's actually happened for the customer. So I spent so many seconds in IVR, I spent so many minutes, if you like, in the total call duration. Did a bit of routing across to the billing call, as you can see down here. And then, Linda had a conversation with that customer for just a little bit over 10 minutes, combined with a bit of wrap up. So, it's a simple, often a typical sort of interaction, but it's a nice visual representation of that detail. And what's nice is as well, I've got, this idea of the audit trail, so I can sort of see if anybody else has looked at these recordings. I can see maybe quality scores. So if a colleague has actually done a performance review, if you will, of this interaction, I'm able to sort of see that score. Maybe as the agent, I can validate my supervisor's score of my work, that type of thing. Going back to the visual, if I make a transfer of this customer, we like to shy away from those if we can, but if I do make a transfer, the visual will just add another leg to that sort of interaction, and I can see both graphically and in detail where that is. So the reason why I wanted to sort of describe this is because, you know, modern cloud-based, you know, especially from the Genesys side, contact center technologies, they are very much all in one. So they're designed to be, if you like, a, you know, interaction handler, whether it's a call, chat, email, social, etc. But also it's carrying the workforce optimization side, so gathering the recordings, allowing for quality. And you can see in this interaction profile, all of those elements are in that same record. Does that make sense? So when I say easy, for me to get metrics about that interaction, A, they're sort of common across all media types, and B, I can sort of choose to grab what I need and help me make my decisions as far as the organization is concerned. So I think that notion of modern cloud, all-in-one sort of design technologies helps make the gathering of metrics easier. Remember, we don't, you know, it eliminates the ACD gives me metrics, the dialogue gives me metrics, the recording gives me metrics, and remember, that type of thing I think helped make metrics difficult in the past to assemble. I tended to have a dedicated team in my organization to crunch lots and lots of data that was downloaded overnight. And again, that leads to human error. And if you like, you know, I would say blurred insights. So, you know, I'm getting information, but actually is it information that I can make good decisions on? So I think, you know, these modern technologies are much, much easier to work with. So that's my first point. The second thing we see then is that there's been a sort of an abundance of new players coming in, specifically looking after you know, metrics opportunities. So from that perspective, I've got a little graphic here of what we call our App Foundry, and this is where we sort of, you know, promote, or if you like, endorse third parties who have verified that their technology works with ours. And in this case, if you look over here at the sort of Pure Cloud dropdown, specifically in analytics, you can see there's a variety of names here, which may be new to you. You may be familiar with them, but we see these guys more and more often being deployed along with our technology, if you like, because they are sort of cool, simple, cloud, you know, cost-effective, easy to consume. Deployment, you're kind of talking maybe half a day, including training. So a very, very different way to sort of look at and handle metrics. And I think as well, in that sort of trend to this kind of more accessible, maybe more real-time oriented metrics, it's kind of less about, you know, getting a dump of a database overnight and do that crunching like I described before, but more about selecting what I actually want to view. And these tools help me to sort of display that information maybe across my organization as a sort of a broadcast, maybe to specific users based upon their hierarchy. But again, I would encourage you to investigate these vendors because they are very, very effective and very, very complementary. And from that perspective, I think, you know, 18 months ago, I didn't see these vendors at all. So it's just an interesting development on that particular subject. The next point, well, I beg your pardon. I did this in my rehearsal too, so apologies. So this is just an example really of the, I think it's the Pure Insights. Yeah, so it's just an example for one of their clients, Hilton Worldwide, where they have like a global sort of visual for their particular organization and allows them to sort of see across the various contact centers that they have, how they're getting on with sort of handling customer calls. So a nice kind of summary wrap-up view for an enterprise type client. If you can imagine like an in-country client, they would have their specific view. So very simple and easy and friendly for them to deploy something like this. And the time to value for this is just like, it's hours these days. It's not days or weeks, or it's very, very simple and easy to use, designed really for the business user. So I mentioned in my intro about this idea of ready integrated. And what I'm kind of referring to here really is the idea that because these vendors exist, they're not just doing Genesys metrics. They're grabbing metrics from wherever, you know, metrics are generated. And obviously today with modern information systems, there's an abundance of metrics. However, these tools allow us to combine, if you will, and kind of plug in the contact center metrics with CRM platforms, maybe with the commerce or ERP type platforms. And it's a very sort of simple thing to do these days. Nothing bespoke, nothing sort of specially coded, just leveraging the benefits of modern technology, but allowing me to maybe bring that combination of you know, contact center performance metrics combined with, you know, maybe Salesforce sales metrics. That then sort of tells me that Mike Murphy, you know, good agent, pretty effective, if you like, in how he's sort of handling his contacts, and sort of close this amount of revenue over the last hours, months, weeks, months, etc. So just a nice way to kind of grab the information you need and allow you to make your decisions faster and easier. And then finally, to the point I made about the most often requested sort of metric, and that is doing your own thing. And here we're sort of steering more now towards the kind of KPIs that the organization are using to really drive their business. And sometimes these are published, publicly, maybe in annual reports, maybe in quarterly business reviews, maybe monthly, maybe weekly, depending upon the organization. But out of the gate, we are combining contact center metrics and, as you can see, some sales metrics, who closed what today or not, as the case may be, contact center and HR metrics, and performance-wise, agent engagement, how are they getting on with their training courses, have they actually achieved all their sort of training goals, combining that with the contact center metrics gives me a good profile of the individual. Partner metrics, so as a brand, I may have 3 or 4, if you like, partners in my organization. So how do I combine my contact center metrics with those third parties? I'd like to have that kind of visual. And then obviously we have the operational metrics as well. So the notion of kind of doing your own thing is where we're able to kind of bring, with this modern technology, a kind of like a friendly developer environment to customers. So they're able to kind of get their colleagues who are pretty bright and think metrics. And I wouldn't say you have to be a developer as such, but someone who's smart with data management, they can kind of grab these tools and very quickly extract what they need and just what they need. And this has become really, really popular. And we're seeing in our applications as we deploy, we can count, if you like, on our cloud customers, how many customers are pinging us with API requests. And the sort of volume of these requests going through is enormous because customers are finding it easy and accessible to just grab the information that they want, publish what they need to make the decision and move on. And really avoid this notion of getting my overnight downloads and crunching it and mashing it together in Excel and then publishing it somehow. All of those kind of heavy lifting things are now history, really. Our in-house team grab what they need, publish to the colleagues, make the decisions, and we move forward. So very refreshing, very, very different. If I summarize, yes, I would absolutely say modern sort of contact center metrics tools are easy. Don't forget those off-the-shelf guys. They are there, they're effective. They're not heavy lifting commercially or integration-wise. They already have, if you like, those sort of capabilities to plug in your other information systems around the organization. And then, that freedom to kind of allow you to decide what do you want to generate your metrics on and how do you want to drive your business, which could be completely different to the norm, because we have to always explore how can we do things better. So that really brings me to the end of my slot. Rachel, I hope that was helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I believe we've got Morris back on the line.
I dread to say yes, but hopefully I am. My apologies, everybody. 3 different kinds of networks, and I simply didn't manage to make any of them work, including dialing in.
Right,
I think probably given the time, yes, maybe if we just went to the last slide.
Perfect. I was going to say we've probably got about 5 minutes. So last slide.
So I won't spend time talking about how we make it work. That's sorry, the slide before that, which the penultimate slide indeed. So here's what I think you can do from a practical point of view, and you can use what Mike's just been saying in order to add these as indicators to your organization today. So number 1, and I did hear some of the comments coming in, and the problem there is not enough organizations let the customer vent first, as was said by one of the panelists. You don't need to do IDMV first. Let's find out what's wrong with the customer. Let's give them a chance to say what they feel. Let's acknowledge that. Let's treat them with some respect, and then take them through the process that we want to take them through. So finding out what the customer's feeling before you manage the first step in your process is number 1, and it's easy to do. It's just about doing a bit of training and just about adding that new metric to what Mike's talked about. The second thing is listen out for the emotional baggage. If they're telling you something about the situation, it's because it's important to them. Acknowledge that, and acknowledge the fact that it's the second time they've called, or that they've been a customer for 20 years, that this is what is important to the customer. Acknowledge it, don't go past it by asking your next question. The third thing is, if you're about to take a customer through a difficult process, then please explain as you go what's going on. That's a vital part, rather than me listening to 5 minutes of silence while you're trying to work out the difference between what I've said and what's being presented to me on the agent screen. The fourth thing is, and I appreciate I missed most of the conversation about what are good metrics. The best metrics of all are to ask as you go and ask simple questions. That way you can improve the experience, rather than doing a post-call experience that 90% of your customers will not get engaged with, but you can also excuse me, you can also triage the conversation as you're going, and you will get significantly more accurate information. The final piece is, ask yourself if the customer was more or less angry at the end of the call than they were at the beginning. That's a great insight. Now, I'm sorry that technology let me down so badly today, and I've let everybody down so badly today. But I will say that all of the information contained on my slides are actually will be available through Call Center Helper, of course. And you can find them on the website for the Customer Experience Foundation. And you don't have to sign up, you don't have to become a member, you won't end up on an email list. It's there publicly for you to use. So, my apologies for the technology stuff, and I'll hand back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Maurice. We got there in the end. We got to the end of your presentation, so all this, we've survived. Right, so to go through to some top tips that we've had today, we've had a tip in from Michaela, who said the spiral of positivity is a good one to use. It could be the customer or a team member, but you gauge where they are on the spiral, and your aim is to get them to the top by the end of the discussion. So they've explained it a bit more and said, picture a spiral, and the customer or teammate who's having a bad experience is down at the bottom. Your aim is to get them to the top of the spiral. You can't get them straight to the top, so listen to them, reassure them, say what you can do rather than can't do, and by taking the process a step at a time, they'll get further and further up the spiral. Maurice, what do you think of that one?
So I think that's a really good analogy, and that's a really good idea. There's two things that I would say about that. The first is, the most effective thing we can do is look at best and worst practice. What worked today and what didn't work today is a really, really useful thing to understand. And the second thing, I missed this from my presentation, is use simple words: a little, a lot, very. Don't make it more complex than that, because the more complex you make it, the more difficult it is to be actionable. But the spiral of positivity is a great idea. You need to have a non-blame culture. We all make mistakes. Let's look at what we did well, look at what we did badly.
Brilliant. So Laura said that she likes the surveys I get from EE. They're texted to me and consist of about 4 questions that you respond to by typing 1 to 10, depending on your answer. They come through within 10 minutes of finishing your call. That's nice. Mary Lou said, customers also think a manager has more authority to get the problem solved or provide a bigger credit. Coaching the agent to verbally take ownership of the customer's issue can sometimes assure the customer the agent is empowered to do what needs to be done. So we've had an opinion in from Gail, who said, dealing with manager calls, we acknowledge that the customer wishes to speak to a manager and offer to make this happen. However, we ask the customer, before I do this, I'd like to take the opportunity to help you with your query, and if I'm unable to, I'll arrange for a manager to speak with you. Positioning it this way lets the customer know that you'll do what they're asking, but also that they're more likely, and in most cases, say, okay, let's see if you can help me. It works for my teams, and I very rarely have to take over a call.
If I may, the only thing I would say above and beyond that is work out why they're ending up wanting to talk to a manager in the first place and fix that. Empowered agents who are confident in what they're doing should, you need to be reducing the number of escalations by looking at root cause.
Brilliant. I think we've got time for one more tip, and Judith said, don't be afraid to empower your agents to solve customer problems. They need the tools and an appropriate level of responsibility given to them to do this. So unfortunately, we've reached the, nearly reached the end of our webinar. I'd just like to ask, could you say in 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about the webinar? If you could put that into the chat room. And today's winning tip, running slowly as well, is Michaela, about the spiral of positivity. So brilliant. We'll be in touch after the webinar to ask about whether you'd like chocolates or champagne. We do have a survey. Please could you help us improve our webinars? And there's also an opportunity to get a demonstration of the Genesys software. If you could fill in the box in the webinars, in the survey afterwards, saying if you'd like a demo. We have taken a recording of today's webinar, and that will be available later on this afternoon. We are back next week with the right ways to motivate staff to put in more effort, so join us then. And it's just a chance for me to say thank you to our 2 speakers today. Maurice, thank you so much for today. Sadly, we've had an interesting time.
Thank you, everybody, and my apologies, and thank you all for your patience.
Brilliant. Well, we got there in the end, and we got your 5 top tips, so thank you very much. And to Mike Murphy from Genesys, thank you as well for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Maurice, and thank you, everybody.
Brilliant. I'll see you all next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.